So my name is Neda Abghari. I'm the Executive Director of the Creatives Project, and I love that I get to do what I love every day. And I think that many of you probably share that same love and joy, and that's one of the reasons we're here. I'm going to continue telling you what I love. I love being able to share stories, and I'm really excited about us having a dialogue and sharing stories today to help us reach our learners in a more productive way. And I'm just really happy to be here. We're all sitting here sharing in this circle because it's actually one of the methods I use to teach. And I want to give you a little bit about my background. I started teaching in 2000 as a high school art teacher in Fulton County. I taught at North Springs High School. I had an amazing mentor and worked alongside Kevin Cole, who together we actually built an amazing magnet arts program. It was really interesting because when I first started teaching, I would receive IEPs, and I would review them and look through the modifications. And as a new teacher, I was really kind of intimidated because it was my first year teaching, and although we were a magnets art school, we were an inclusive school. So we had magnet and non-magnet students, and we did have an inclusion program. And so I would get really intimidated by these modifications, mainly because I felt that when I tried to follow them, instead of including the learner feeling included, the modifications actually resulted in kind of an exclusion from the class based on the way that I would have to implement that modification. And so that was always a frustration of mine because, as you all know, especially children with learning disabilities and behavioral disorders, they're already kind of on the outside. So here we are with this inclusion program, but I felt like within that structure, it was a bit difficult for me to really create an inclusive environment through the modifications that were required of me. So as a young teacher, that was my first year teaching. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do with this? I did my best. But a few years passed, and in 2003, I decided to try this thing that at the time was called student-centered learning. And it was a lot more labor-intensive. Basically, what it required was for the students to lead the way. And I thought, well, if I'm able to create project-based assignments where the students are in charge of their education and through my facilitation, I bet that I could help nurture an environment where even those children who did not feel included through their inclusion program would feel more a part of our culture. And the reason I felt that it might work is because whenever you set up a group dynamic, the weight is carried. And so even with assigned roles, allowing the children to participate in roles that they feel more connected to, yet still take away from the experience and learn from the experience across the board the standards. And so I was really excited about that, and I tried it in my printmaking class, and it was a huge success. However, at that time I was really young, and I was kind of expanding my own arts profession, and soon thereafter I transitioned out of teaching in a classroom. So now, after that experience, with every teaching experience I have, I teach in that way. And it's through project-based, student-centered learning, and also socio-emotional learning, which is kind of what we're doing right now. So I'm going to share with you what those concepts are. I'm going to move there, and if you guys want to sit to where you can see the screen, there will be information up there in a little bit, and we'll share some more stories. So thanks, everybody. As I mentioned, so when I started, I was in a classroom. Now when I go out, I don't know where I'm going to end up most of the time. Through the Creatives Project and BSA's partnership, we create a ton of programming together, separate from what we have here today, but it's educational programming. And one of our missions is to serve underserved populations. And so one thing about the thought and the way people kind of view people with disabilities is that they're physical. However, there's so many different types of learners, and in today's society, the way our technology is set up, sometimes it encourages and pushes forward learning disabilities that we don't always see, or emotional disabilities, or environmental disabilities. And so it's really interesting to go from a setting where you know exactly what you need to know about the artist, the young artist, into a scenario where you really have no clue, and you're not allowed to have that information because you are an artist in residence, or you're a visiting organization. And so something that has been really interesting to me is the navigation of the system. You know, how do you come into a scenario where, first of all, you're not even the main classroom instructor? There's already an art teacher in place or a classroom teacher in place, and they have their own set of rules. And how do you come in and create an environment and a feeling and a dynamic? And so those are the two most important things to me are to create that environment and create a group dynamic. Those are the things that I strive to build throughout the experience, whether it's a one-day workshop or it's a month-long residency or I'm there for an entire quarter of school. And so I wanted to start off not by going into the methodology, but sharing some stories with you. And a lot of the stories I'm going to share are the experiences that Elizabeth and I have had working together through our partnership. As I said, we serve underserved populations. So a lot of times I will go into a classroom and I will meet individuals, and if I didn't know better, I might assume they weren't interested in what I was talking about. However, being sensitive to this type of knowledge, that when you walk into an underserved population or Title I school specifically, a lot of these children have external factors that impact their connection to you. And so I always work to gain their trust and establish a rapport so that that experience in their life can be communicated to me so that we can work through it and leave it behind us and kind of clear the slate to have a more engaging experience. And so I know you guys probably are interested in personal stories, and as I talk, I want you to feel really comfortable asking me anything. Like, you don't have to wait to the end. This can be an open dialogue between all of us. But one of the interesting scenarios that we experienced this year was teaching at a local APS school where we were piloting a program. And I was there with our artists, and we were not aware of the kids that we would have, but right as the unit started, the teacher said to me, well, Neda, I'm a little nervous about our learners and the fact that these learners have been chosen for you because they are like top-notch troublemakers. And, you know, my automatic reaction was, it's okay. We're gonna have a great time. And I always try to approach it from a place of love and acceptance. So, okay, they're troublemakers. What does that mean? Where does that come from? You know, how can I approach each child as an individual to impact their experience in a certain way? And so, entered into the classroom. I had a little pep talk with my artist, and I'm like, yeah, we know the art teacher here has to deal with 30 kids every day. We're dealing with 15. So let's approach this from our own experience, from our own backgrounds, and see what we can bring to the table. So it was interesting because in a situation like that, you often start off with one idea, but you've got to be flexible. So that's one thing that I wanted to share with you, is because when you walk into a teaching experience, you might have a whole idea of how you want the experience to unfold, but by the end of it, it's completely different. So we walk in with the artist, I give him a pep talk, and I say, okay, so here's the deal. She has 30 kids for 7 periods, all the time. She's worn out. Let's see what we can do with these kids. So, first day, did this. Come in, we all sit down, we talk. The kids are really excited. They're on their best behavior. We're so just elated about the experience. We leave. Same thing happens the next week. Everything's great. As we get in deeper into the school year, things get a little crazy. And we have to completely shift, top to bottom, the curriculum. So what I want you guys to think about is you have all the tools if you allow yourself to remain flexible and not feel intimidated by being in a situation like that. You know, it's really about connecting with each individual and learning how to manage those situations. For example, one day we were there, and just to give you an idea of the age range, we typically work with middle school to high school kids, but these were 5th graders. And towards the end of the school year, fights were breaking out. We had all of the behavioral disordered kids in one class. Now, I didn't know specifically where they were on the scale. However, just interacting with them one-on-one was huge in helping us manage the situation. So I want to just share stories about how that works. I mean, do you guys have questions? What do you want to know about the scenario? What can I share with you that will help you feel better? Now, I have tons of stuff I want to tell you.
I guess, what particular things in the moment to diffuse the individual students so that it didn't impact the other students in the room as well? So what visual cue did you see? What audio cue did you hear to make you go, that's going to become something else? How can I address that so that it doesn't become a bigger issue?
Absolutely. So I remember one student in particular. He was full of energy all the time, and he was really small, much smaller than all the other kids. And he was like a little firecracker, a little pit bull, you know? And I always try to keep an ear out for all the different dynamics going on while they're working. And when I would hear a situation kind of escalate from a joke to per se, like he's taking it personally, what I always do is I walk over to them, I use my hands and my body and put my hand on their back and say, sweetheart, why don't we come over here for a second and let's talk about how you feel today. What's going on? You know, this isn't behavior that I usually see out of you. Is there something that really upset you today? And how are you like, I basically talk them through their management. So is it going to help us right now to have this negative interaction with our teammates? And that's like an example. So a lot of times I take them and separate them from the group so they don't feel embarrassed, or take them outside and say, oh, you guys will be right back. We're just going to talk about something real quick.
So you have the good fortune of having another teacher in the room with you.
Yes. As a visiting artist, that's a very good question. As a visiting artist, we often have teachers in the room with us. Now, let's say that there wasn't a teacher in the room with me.
And that's my situation most of the time, unfortunately. Or fortunately,
right.
The teachers use it as a break.
Right.
Because they're busy and they're overwhelmed, and they then end up
right.
Leaving the classroom. So I think that's my big challenge too.
Absolutely. And I think that, and I'll go into depth about setting the tone and all that stuff, but it's really important how you create the spirit of camaraderie in your room, and that's why I very much like to focus on project-based learning, because it allows the children to hold each other accountable. Like, first day, hey guys, we are so excited, this is what we're going to do. Are you as excited as we are? Do you want to be here? Because if you want to be here, this is what this means. We relate to our classmates in this way. It doesn't matter what happens outside that door. When you walk inside this space, you are in a safe place. We are here to support each other. And based on the population, like, that's not the type of language or discipline strategy that they're used to. And so setting that tone is really important, and it takes time. But if the kids are aware of it, and you can go back to that and say, this was our agreement, and hold them accountable again, it really helps in that management. So let's say I didn't have, the classroom teacher wasn't always there. So in that scenario, I might bring attention to each of the groups. Okay, group rock stars, you guys are so on task, keep doing what you're doing. Jimmy from Group Rockstars, could you come over here to this table for a moment and make sure that these guys don't need any help? All right, sweetheart, let's go talk outside. Mm-hmm. Just with the door cracked, so I can still see you guys. I know what you're doing. But I'm using it as an opportunity to allow the kids to take responsibility for their conduct as a class. I'm allowing different types of individuals in the room to have a more power role, and that child also feels that they're attended to and they're cared about. And a lot of times with behavioral emotional disorders, that is what they need to calm themselves down and bring them back. Because a lot of these children have triggers, major triggers. And so in those moments, it's really important to have a system in place where everyone's helping everyone. And so you are able to take a moment to get down on their level and say, honey, what is going on? Like, this is not appropriate. How can I help you to deal with this emotion right now? And so we experienced so much of that at this particular school that it really shifted the entire plan we had for that school. Originally, I mean, it was a whole unit, so just actually a whole semester. So we were there from January till the end of school. We met with the kids once a week. When we went in there, we had all these ideas about, okay, well, we're gonna get all this done, and by the end, they're gonna have all these videos, and they're 5th graders, but they're gonna do all this stuff. But quickly, you realize that it is okay to dream. It is okay to have your standards way up here and give your students the tools to get there. However, it's also very important to grow with them. So you're engaging them, and they are connected to what you're doing. Like, to me, it's more important, especially as a visiting artist at times, like, even if it's for a month-long residency, to during that time, if I can have any impact on their learning disability, you know, if I am able to give them any more tools to successfully navigate through their lives, then that's great, you know, and not to put aside all of our arts programming. However, I feel that there's always an opportunity to connect with each of your learners. And it takes time, like I said. It takes time. It depends on your resources. It depends on, you know, the support of the administration. You know, it depends on so much, but just bringing the thought to your mind and just being aware makes the biggest difference. You know, a lot of these kids come to school hungry. Like I know how ornery I get when I haven't eaten. I'm like, stay away. And so just being aware that, you know, this isn't apathy. This kid, this student probably really does want to be engaged, but doesn't have the tools right now. So what can I do to help them through that situation? Another little example there was, I remember I was experiencing major allergies that day, and I had the student come in. His eyes are all teary, and a great student, but had the worst attitude. And I just, you know, tapped him on the shoulder. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Let's talk about this. He's like, so mad, you know. This is happening. I don't want to do anything today. I'm like, okay, well, we have choices. We can calm down together. Let's do a couple of breathing exercises. Look at my eyes. I've got allergies too. It hurts. It's not a good thing. I feel bad too. I'm really tired. I don't feel well. But let's decide what we want our day to look like. So he calms down. Then I give him choices. He still didn't feel good. And so the choices were, okay, this is what we're doing today. This is an example of what you can do. Like, we were working on photography, so we were working in groups. So, okay, well, instead of being the director, like we talked about you being in this group today, do you want to record the experience? So also being flexible and allowing the kids to not feel good, but still be engaged is really, really important. Do you guys?
Okay, so I'm the kind of person that likes to boil down, you know. So what I'm hearing is you always set ground rules in your classroom. This is our contract. This is how we've decided to work with one another. And you can use that to remind people later should you need to step out for whatever reason.
Exactly.
I'm hearing that you do regular check-ins with your students. You know, you tune into them because of your methodology of each individual.
Right.
And say, how are you today? And how does that affect what you're doing today? But
Exactly.
I'm also curious with one of your methods is we're talking about a population that often has a lot of things done to them. Discipline is done to them, medical procedures are done to them, their education plans are done to them, and that in your classroom sometimes
Yes, exactly.
So I'm hearing those three
Mhm.
things. You did lose me a little bit in how that impacts, because I know we all have goals when we go into these things of I want to get this curriculum point done by the end, even if the project itself is not done. With all of those things in mind and with your classroom management, how do you keep that in mind?
So what I do is, as the situation is changing, it's not like we just leave behind the curriculum. That day, immediately, we go back to the curriculum and we start tweaking it. Okay, so now in this situation, we know more about our learners. How can we change the curriculum to better fit the needs of our students? Does it mean shortening it? Does it mean not going in as much depth to cover this one particular concept? However, we're still covering that concept. So what we do in that situation is we bring in accommodations. And so this is like a perfect segue into going into that methodology. So let me pull that up for you. Oh, it says it's recording, I think. No, it's not. Okay. Is that right? Okay, perfect. Can I move this? Okay. So these are some of the accommodations. Like, once you find yourself in that scenario that you can make that will not impact your curriculum standards, but will better serve the students that you're working with. And it can happen individually with each of your students. It could happen as a group. Now, in our situation, all of our kids were, I was told, I didn't have their IEPs, but most of them were behavioral disordered and emotional disordered kids. And so knowing that as a group in that scenario, we shifted the entire curriculum. Every day we would go in and make modifications based on what happened. And as long as those modifications continued to work, we continued to go at that pace. As the end of the school year approached, it became more difficult. And so we would make adjustments as we went. Yes, did you have a question?
From your experience, how did these accommodations affect your ability to complete your curriculum goals? And was there a danger at some point of accommodation turning into acquiescence?
For our experience, we were able to complete our curriculum goals, but not to the idealized version that we wanted, because we had a very big end product, and so that we originally wanted to accomplish with the kids. But these accommodations allowed us to still complete smaller projects that covered the same standards.
Can you give specific examples? Yeah. Like, our original idea was that all the kids would be doing video by the end of the
Yes.
year, which accomplished these curriculum points. By the end of the year, what we had them doing was, and I'm making this up, portraiture,
Right.
which still accomplished these curriculum points. Can you give those?
Absolutely. So when we started, I'll just speak on that because that's exactly what was going on. We were supposed to do, it was the Capture Project. We were going to create a video documentary. We were going to first we were going to start off with photography. They were going to learn the tools of photography and through language arts enrichment, go out into their school community to create portraits. Then to build upon that, we were going to introduce film and video. So originally the goal was to create this video that the children built together and that they could release into the school and through social media to help empower their voices and make an impact on a subject that they felt very strongly about. So it's very student-centered, so they were going to decide what they wanted to talk about, what their goal was with the video. But when we realized that we had these other scenarios to work with, that video portion of it went out the window. However, the standards that we were still able to cover in regards to creating that story, telling that story, creating those images, taking those photographs to help support their story, all of those experiences still fell in line with our original goals and standards. They just allowed us to complete the work in that amount of time based on the resources that we had available to us.
So, the whole goal was creating a video project. Was it like 1 or 5 kids out of 10 or 15 or 20 that were affecting the whole group progressing through that? Or was the whole group like, working with a specific group of EBD children who are all going through this and the other, or is it like 4 or 5 kids out of 20?
So, impacting everyone else's experience. So this particular group was a group of 15, and they were on different levels with their disorder. And so, to answer your question, there were a few kids that were more difficult than others in terms of it was difficult for them to work with each other in that group environment. And so one of the accommodations that we would make going through was we would switch the groups. We started off with groups of 4, and then 4 students that had one teaching artist with them. We would all be in the same class together. We started off that way. The dynamic in the room would change. So like, kid from this group would say something to the kid from that group. So then we changed the location. We would teach them in separate parts of the room. Then we expanded that to separate parts of the school when we were going out and taking our photographs. By the end, yes, the end of the school year, these kids were at each other's throats. And the way we modified it then was we separated the groups out on different days. So on Tuesday, we're going to meet with 4 kids in one group. We're going to come back Thursday, meet with 4 more kids as one group, so that we could still stay focused on completing our standards and providing the children with the experience to go through the entire curriculum, modified or accommodated, but it still allowed us to fulfill our goals. But yes, absolutely. With this particular group, there were, as a group as a whole, if they were together, absolutely, all of them were in it. You know, one day I came to the school, we all came to the school, there were 4 of us, and we were so excited, we were ready to go, it's towards the end of the school year. Assistant principal walks up and she says, canceled. We're so sorry, we had to cancel your experience with them today.
That happened to my husband when he taught high school. He taught theater and photography and intro art, and he taught himself full-time. And basically he would work with a group of students all year long on a theater production, and then at the end it would get canceled because it was considered non-essential to testing. So
detail.
Mhm,
and I know
absolutely.
we're working with us on this project together. This particular population was all of the children in that school dealing with a particular
In the 5th grade.
disability, put in a classroom together where they had never been together before. So that was challenge number one. Challenge number two was the administration considered participating in this project to be a reward for good behavior. So at any time, those children could be pulled out of the situation. So Neda was also trying to manage, let's not add to that dynamic, and let's give them different tools to deal with things so that they're not bad children, so they don't lose the opportunity.
Keep it positive.
Right.
And that was part of it's been canceled, is apparently there was some sort of issue with this group of children, and so they canceled the whole thing.
Oh, because they didn't deserve to have the
Because
experience.
they didn't deserve to have the
Okay.
experience, because the administration felt that this particular project was a reward.
And in that, or you want to
One
continue?
more thing that I think is very crucial is it was a photography-based residency, but the curriculum points we were working on were literacy-based. Okay, so that's why it's easier to take something that was going to look like this and make it look like this and still hit the curriculum points. It's because the method to getting to those literacy points could be shifted on the fly without shifting the curriculum goals.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we're doing at BSA Arts in Georgia, and we share with our teaching artists, is residencies that are arts integration based. They might be social studies residencies, they might be, literacy residencies, they might be language arts residencies, but art is how you get there. I think that might help you understand a little more the context you're working in.
Absolutely. And so when that happened, just so you know, she came out, she canceled the class, but that was also an opportunity for learning. So when that happened, I still gathered all the boys. They happened to be boys. I gathered them all. We came outside into the hallway and we talked about it. Same thing. Why did this happen? How did this happen? How did it make you feel? How many of you were the ones who were involved in what they are blaming you for? Who wants to volunteer that information? And I was really loving about it. And I said, it takes a lot of courage to admit that you did something wrong. And so these are all small examples, but I bring them up to say that, yes, management is a big part of this. And when you have learning disability and emotional behavioral disorders, it takes out time from what you originally had planned, but that is okay. And it should not be a situation that keeps you from going into it, because there are ways of getting through on the other side with a really positive experience and engaging kids in a way that they weren't able to be engaged before. So going back, timing, giving a student specifically in a group more time to work on a project, scheduling, so giving a student, okay, well, we only had one day set aside for this, but I'm going to give you an extra day to work on your portion of this group project. Accommodating the presentation, providing it in different formats, the setting. We did a lot of this when we were moving around to different parts of the school, and then response accommodation. So some of the children that we were working with too, we were working with language arts, and so some of them had difficulties writing and reading, and so we would make accommodations for that as well, and that's an example of the response accommodation. For example, there was, in the beginning, we had them write little bios about themselves and present them to the class. And I walked over to a student and noticed that he was having difficulty writing his story. And not knowing what his background was, I just sat down next to him and offered him my support. You know, is there a way that I can help you figure this out? I realized that when we sounded out his words, he wrote everything out. When he stood up to recite it back, he couldn't read what he had written. And so in that scenario, if I recall correctly, I gave him time. He worked through it. It just took him longer. And then as a group, in our open, loving environment, we allowed him to do it again more smoothly so that he too could feel the pride of presenting his bio to the class. But it took more time, you know, and it took us working with him one-on-one to help him work through that literacy, you know. Do you guys have any questions about this?
What I see in the classroom now, at least my school particularly, is that their schools are to improve writing and reading skills, because we have that's one of our little demographics that we're trying to improve those skills. But of course, we know that kids learn differently. Our kids are verbal people, some are visual people, but having them to take, yes, these are your accommodations because this is how you express yourself, but then how can we work with them so that they don't look at this reading and writing as like a punishment? It's like, no, we want to enhance this skill because eventually we need to be able to do that. Like, what techniques?
Specifically,
encourage, I guess, that.
You know, to be honest, I haven't had much. This was the first experience that we had where we were integrating writing into an arts-based curriculum with this population. But what I found was there was a lot of hesitation. When we started talking to them, oh, well, we're going to start off the project by telling our own stories. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to write stories. We're going to share stories. There was a lot of hesitation. And so for us, what we found was figuring out a way to cover those standards, but less, quote unquote, academically, where they were still telling a story, but it was a story they wanted to tell, was a great way to get them more involved and excited about the exercise. And so, I mean, I can't speak too much on that, but I do know that any kind of programming that we've created has always been student-centered. So automatically, if it's related back to the student's life, what do you want to tell us about your personal life, or what gets you excited? It was a great way to get them more engaged as opposed to, oh, well, here's the topic we want you to write about. And so within those writing assignments, then we would go through and work with them one-on-one. Okay, well, how could you rearrange the sentence so that it's proper grammar, you know?
Can I give you an example of my own experiences with teachers? Because I've worked with that population and trying to. Sometimes we know one student write, the other student sing. And then they edit together. And that will really strengthen your skills because they're not worried about their own story, right? In their writing. They're worried about someone else's story with writing, and they're more emotionally invested in it. And then when they edit together, then they're learning those verbs and skills without that pressure. But I come at it from the so.
Do you guys have any other questions about this? Any stories that you have experienced personally that you'd like to share with the rest of our group? No? Okay.
One of the things that we discovered is, because our work is very emotion based, we do, when we're working with students in an extreme situation, not like a one class play shop, but like a residency or something along those lines. One of the processes that we use every day is what we call check-in. We will bring the kids together in a circle, and everyone is invited to check in to speak their emotional truth into the space. And we have very specific
Exactly.
guidelines about that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's stay in check, let's stay in check, we don't want to those types of things. And when something comes up in the work that's emotionally charged, one of the things that we really try to do is get the students then to infuse that emotional life into, put it on text is the phrase that we use, to actually incorporate it into the work. So it actually becomes part of our structure.
Right.
Which I'm kind of old school, so I value structure, and I guess that's why I'm struggling a little bit with some of these concepts, because I'm fearful of letting accommodation get to the point that structure falls apart and that we're losing sight of our objectives. And so, I mean, we clearly state with our students, these are the expectations. In fact, one of the things that we did very early in the process is we established a company covenant. And we invite students to say, what are the behaviors that we want to reinforce? What are the behaviors that we don't want to have? What are the rules that we're going to agree on? And they have to agree on these rules. We write them down, have the kids sign it, and we say, okay, this is our covenant, this is our agreement. So that if there's a disciplinary situation that comes up, we can go back to it and say, okay, here's the agreement, here's your signature.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to get back into the structure that we agreed to? And actually, we have a system, and it's worked very, very effectively in times when students just don't want to go to the program. We will actually fire kids from the program. And then we'll have a company meeting, and the company will discuss whether or not we want to rehire that student. And then we will give that student an opportunity to come back into the fold if they choose to. But they have to be invited by the company back in. If it's so egregious that the company just can't fly it.
So these stories that were just shared are actually a part of the social emotional learning spectrum. And when I first talked about setting the tone, this is how I work to do that, with methods that you described as well. So establishing a sense of self-awareness amongst the group, helping them to identify their emotions. So let's say the example that you and I went through. That was a situation where I was working with that student to help him understand what was going on inside of him, so that once those emotions are understood, they are better able to manage them through their self-management. In the self-awareness, yes, groups. You know, when we first walked in here and we sat down as a group, I was working to set the stage for the environment in here to be a safe place where we could all share our experiences together, where we were clear about, okay, well, did Elizabeth have an okay time coming in? You know, I asked all of you how you felt, you know, and if you were feeling okay. And that was an opportunity to kind of let the group know, well, Elizabeth or Neda might not be having a good day right now. So let's be socially aware of our group members and our team members. Relationship skills. So these all go together. Working through example, by showing them what is it like to work through an emotion. What is it like to work through a conflict resolution. And responsible decision making. So if I'm here acting in this way, how is it going to impact the rest of my group? Am I making a responsible decision right now? And that's why it was so important for me to call them out into the hall that day and have a talk with them and say, who's going to be courageous enough to accept their part in this? And how has that impacted everyone else? That decision you made, was it a responsible decision? So it's kind of the groundwork for setting that tone and creating that environment that you can continue. Once you've set it up, you can always fall back on, oh, this is what we've set up. Are you in? Are you out? Are you fired? Are you staying with us? You know that this is how we manage our space. This is how we create the environment, our learning environment, and what is your part in it. So I want to show you guys a little video.
Social and emotional skills are the essential skills for success in school, work, and life.
Social emotional learning centers their mind and body. It reduces their emotional tension so they can be open to new content and material. We find that academic outcomes increase exponentially when students are nurtured, loved, and cared for, that we get much more out of them when we first address social emotional needs. So for us, it's actually an academic intervention and not just an emotional one.
If we expect students to be college and career ready, it's important for us to focus on these skills and competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Self-awareness is the ability to identify your emotions, to be able to tie thoughts and feelings to behaviors.
We find that self-awareness is one of the hardest things for young people, being aware of their own body space and the impact of their words and emotions on other people. So a lot of the work we do is reflective, through conflict mediation, through circles, through journaling, having them see their own impact on the world and then how to shift that or make a different choice next time.
Self-management is the ability to self-motivate, to have self-control, to regulate one's emotions.
In the classroom, that may be a breathing exercise, or that might be counting to 5 or taking a break.
So with students who don't really know how to deal with their anger or don't really know how to resolve conflict, we're giving them a tool that helps them deal with it in a less stressful way.
Social awareness is about embracing diversity, showing empathy for others. Activities might include service learning projects, addressing social justice issues. Role-playing is a great opportunity for students to address how a person might have felt in a conflict on the playground.
We're going to see if other people have had some of the very same experiences around bullying that we've had.
You're in my boat if you have a bully now.
Wow, I see a lot of people.
Relationship skills are important in project-based learning. It's the ability to work cooperatively with someone, to resolve conflict.
It's the one skill you need your whole life. You may not need calculus tomorrow, but you have to know how to work in relationship, whether it's for a coworker or a life partner. You have to know how to handle conflict and how to handle challenges.
Sometimes at recess, Marnie would come over and just start talking about us and saying mean things.
Is it your job to make Danae's job at school hard?
No, I know it's a form of bullying, and sometimes I'll say sorry to her.
So you choose to be someone's ally and make a better choice.
Responsible decision-making is considering the well-being for self and others. It's evaluating the consequences for various behaviors or actions. We do this through shared agreements, one-to-one problem solving, or having students debate an issue.
If you were like, hey, Kashida, how much does an A cost in this class? And you took out your wallet and, and I was like, I think $50 would work. Which one of us would be corrupt in that case?
You're the one that's asking for the money?
We're truly teaching these students to be productive citizens. We're teaching them life skills. We're teaching them how to problem solve effectively. We're teaching them how to be resilient.
I think of all the billions of dollars we've spent on Title I and all these intervention programs, and when all is said and done, what do we have to show for it? I think we're trying to teach technical things instead of devoting some of the resources to teach who you are as a person. Once you know who you are, then learning becomes exciting because you've already established a discipline.
It's important for teachers and principals to understand that it can't be a binder off the shelf. It can't be something that happens from 2:15 to 4:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It has to be part of the school culture.
Giving teachers flexibility, giving them a range of skills, giving them different ways that it can look, and allowing them to take their own personality and match that to what they want in their classroom has been the best way to get authentic, true practice.
If we continue to do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we always got. Is that good enough? I don't think it's good enough for the 21st century. We need to be the outliers to try things that have never been tried and see if they work. What are we waiting for?
I thought, well, wow, there's this movement now around creating these environments, and there are so many more resources out there. There aren't many, but I was able to locate this one. And, you know, it is sometimes difficult to describe and remember these very specific relationships and how they impact the kids, but I also feel that as creatives, we have a special opportunity because we are known as thinking a little bit outside of the box. And I believe it is more accepted for someone to walk into a more creative classroom where you see people sitting in a circle talking and discussing and kind of setting the tone for this type of environment. And so I wanted to show you this because it has been such a huge tool, and intuitively it's happened, but huge tool in helping me to create an environment where I'm better able to then realize the cues for a learning disability. Now, if the circle wasn't here, if I was in front of my art room, in front of the class, just talking, and the kids weren't working in groups, it would give me less of an opportunity to witness the cues. It would give me less of an opportunity to see how they interact with each other. And a lot of these disabilities that we don't speak of really involve that type of interaction. One of the groups that we work with is Jacob's Ladder. We've worked with them in the past, and they are a school for children with neurodevelopmental delays. VSA and the Creatives Project partnered on a project there, and we worked with a group of children functioning on the autism spectrum. And creating this environment where we came in every day, we just kind of checked in. How are you feeling? What did you do today? Just that moment of like unwinding and relieving some of their stress so that they felt comfortable to share with us was really, really great. I want to go into project-based learning, which is how I create that team dynamic. This is kind of how I set the environment, but the team dynamic is very much student-centered and project-based, and have an example of how that came into play at Jacob's Ladder. So let me pull this up. So project-based learning is allowing your students to take control of their learning experience. Creating classes where you go to the student and you say, these are the concepts that we need to cover, but how do you want to get there? In my printmaking class, for instance, we knew that the standards were we had to cover all the different types of printmaking. Now, I could stand up, preach it to the class, Or I could turn around and say, who's interested in this form of printmaking? Who wants to learn about lithography? Who wants to learn about screen printing? And who wants to then take that and teach it to the class? So it takes much more planning on your part in the sense of organizing and creating the scaffolding for the kids to be successful in, but it really allows them to take ownership of their experience and then turn around and teach it. The real world connection is finding a way to relate it back to their lives. So in that printmaking class, oh, Juan, you're really into urban culture and music. You're teaching screen printing. What are you going to do with that? Can we think of ways that we can tie that love for design and music into your presentation, and what does that look like? So when you teach project-based learning, you're always turning it back on the kids and giving them the tools to create that experience for themselves and for others. Like I said, core to learning and standards. You don't walk away from the standards. You can work backwards so that you have the standards up front, you know what you want to cover, and then you help the students organize the way they want to teach those standards and learn those standards in their groups. I'm going to give you examples of all this too. Structured collaboration. So imagine we're in a group and I as the teacher know that these are the standards they need to cover, and they are working with each other and kind of going in on a tangent. It is okay for me to come in and say, are you guys thinking about this? How can we redirect, how can you as the teacher redirect their learning to stay focused in that collaboration? They want to feel, it's really important for them to feel like the structure is there, like they can always come to you so that you can put them back on track while they're working with each other. Student driven, the teacher becomes a facilitator and the students take more control. Multifaceted assessments. It's really important in a group project that they have checkpoints as to where they are, have they accomplished the standards that they have wanted to up until that point, are they on the right track? And again, you'd be amazed at how excited the kids get about creating the structure or the lesson themselves. I've also, in that printmaking class, they all graded each other. They had checkpoints. At the end, they tested each other. And so it was really great to see how excited they were about coming up with their unit, getting other kids excited about it, and then at the end, oh, well, I'm going to give you a test and see if you listened to what I was teaching you. And in that group dynamic, the reason this is so great for inclusive setups is that you can assign or help assign those roles within that group. When we worked at Jacob's Ladder, for instance, and we were working with the children on the autism spectrum, we had this one student who, first day of class, nothing. He refused to do anything. We were going to do a photography project as well. It was pared down a little bit from the capture project that you see here that I'll explain as well. But he was so intimidated by the social interaction portion of it that he refused to do anything. So, you know, we continued on through the class and second class, you know, all the while trying to engage him, same thing. So finally we sat down and we just started talking. Okay, so what's going on here? You know, he really didn't like being in photographs, like you were not allowed to photograph him in any way. And And the accommodation that we came up with, or the role that he played in his group, was that he was going to be the technical genius. You know what, Miss Neda, I can't be in front of the camera, and I understand how these photographs work, but I do not want to be the center of attention. He just ran with it. He was in charge of the blog, he was in charge of editing all the text that the kids wrote, and that was a way that we were really able to bring him into the experience within this group setting. And so if this group setting did not exist, I personally would have a much more difficult time adjusting the roles or helping the kids find ways where they're learning the content and they're actively engaged, but they're still comfortable in that experience.
And let me clarify, because I back to your point about making sure the structure stays in there and that curriculum points are always being managed through the process. The documentation part of that project, the blog, the website, the text editing and stuff like that, was all part of the project. It made it into the curriculum. What we were able to do with this particular young man is give him ownership of that part of the project. So it took it, and it actually helped his social interaction skills with his fellow students, because he was in a place of responsibility that he actually didn't take on a regular basis. And he volunteered. This was a big deal. Part of what we do when we build these curriculum, we build those holding points so that we know you can say at some point a child that's living on the autism spectrum might have issues with being photographed or with touch or with that kind of thing. Where are there open points? Where are there points we can put a student dealing with certain issues? And that just comes with experience of knowing, that's a good place. This particular child, if I remember correctly, volunteered to take this responsibility once he understood what it was.
Well, it was a situation where we were discussing the possibilities. Again, like keeping it student-centered. These are the ways in which you could still be involved in the project and still have an impact on the project. Which one do you think you could do? Like, if you could take over one of these roles, would you be excited? And that's when it completely shifted. I would say like he was probably like the one that was most excited every day when we got there. Miss Neda, I edited so-and-so's project. Will you come look at it online? Like, it looks great. And then finally, towards the very end, he actually did let us take a photograph of him. We didn't display it anywhere, but it was a big deal because his whole time there, that was the dynamic. Like, never in photos, very separated from the group, and this was a great way just to get him excited and involved. And this might happen in so many different ways based on what you're teaching, but if you think about structuring it in a way that gives you flexibility to help facilitate different types of roles within that group, I think that you will be successful in impacting different types of learners. So why don't we take a little break, and then afterwards we can either I'm going to leave it up to you guys if you guys would like to do an assignment together, or if you would like for me to walk it through visually. We can talk about what you want to do when we get back from break. Thanks. It kind of the topic came up, so let's talk about that just a little bit more, and really talk about, it was a question that you had asked about, oh, well, you're in the class, like, how do I do this all by myself? TCP, the Creatives Project, is actually very lucky because we have a situation set up to where we have resident artists who are mentors who usually go into a situation together. It's part of our organization to not have them in there alone, so they at least have each other. And I believe that VSA does have that in place as well.
Try not to put a teaching artist into a classroom situation by themselves, because part of our mission is mentoring one teaching artist to another. So there's always is relative, always a master teaching artist in the room with a junior teaching artist, so that we're also doing that professional development for our teaching artists at the same time we're doing the residencies in the classroom. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
But I also think it's okay to establish that if you are in a situation where you do go to a school and you are there as a resident, I think it's very important to convey that the classroom teacher needs to be there. You know, and especially in terms of liability, because legally you're not allowed you cannot be liable for those children.
Absolutely.
And so,
and it is a conversation we have. It's not confirm and require, but life is really tough for teachers, and they do have to step out at times, and you know, and again, I think all of this stuff is just so amazing. Just to remind, it's a great reminder, I guess, that it's also a philosophy, it's a way of life, it's this methodology and pedagogy, and it's going to be about probably, and you mentioned this earlier, Jessica, how we make this work in our own situations. I'm often in 1 hour at a time.
Right.
That's all I get with these kids. Or we have 12 to 14 different school groups coming from 1 hour at a time in the center every week, and it's great.
Right.
So ability to quickly recognize and shift is great, but just taking a breath and saying, can I do it all in 45 minutes or an hour? No. But I can create an environment that might teach them to know themselves better. So I think that's what I'm, even on the break, is trying to filter and process a bit, is how to make all this bite-sized and relevant to our own unique experiences.
And being able to shift from one thing to the other. You know, you've got your bite sizes, and you've got 5 of them. And you may think when you start out that you're going to use number 1, but you're absolutely willing to go to number 4 because you have to. Right. And especially with the populations that we're working with, that understanding of either your curriculum point can change at any time.
and also thinking about what resources can you build into the situation in your particular situation. Like, for instance, let's go back to TCP. When TCP first started, it was just me, right? And it's amazing how just having a conversation with a colleague could help. I mean, if you're only there for an hour, is there a way to bring in a volunteer? Now, that volunteer is not going to be as hands-on and will not share that responsibility the same way, but I also feel in terms of classroom management, it sends a message to the kids that we are still here and there are enough of us to manage the situation, you know, and so relying on volunteer staff who might be interested. And I know it does get a little tricky when you're going into a school in terms of having the permission of that individual, but thinking about what your resources are and how can you tap into those resources in creative ways that will further support what you're doing.
And I love for the students to see two adults communicating. I know a lot of their households don't often have that dynamic, and that's why, for many, many reasons, it's great to have more than one grown-up in the room, because at least they see two grown-ups who might not be similar. They don't have to be. They might, they might have conflict, but they'll resolve it. But them modeling that is just so amazing.
It's so important.
We strive for that, but I'm seeing it more and more that you all of a sudden look around, and why am I alone in the classroom? And I don't know if anyone else does that and does school visits too, or has that experience, but it is becoming the past this year and a half so much more prevalent.
Wow.
In the schools.
You had a comment?
I don't know if this is an answer or solution or a suggestion or whatnot, but it occurs to me when I used to have to go to class, when I was working my other job, when I would be the teaching artist going into classrooms and do my activities, and usually I was in a classroom 30-45 minutes with pre-K kindergarten classes. And very often I was like, okay, here we go. And do a little song and dance, and the teacher sits in the floor, does a something like that. And I guess now that guess let them know ahead of time, like, hey, you know, this is something also that, you know, if you want to get some hands-on with us, and that way you can use this in your room when we go. Because I know as a teacher, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, how did you do that? That was cool. Can I borrow that? How did you do that? But that's just me as a teacher. Not all teachers are like that, I guess. But how do you present that to the teacher as well? It's like, hey, this is also for you too.
Another thing too that I stress all the time, and this is kind of separate from our topic, but just general time management, like what Marquetta was saying about having everything ready and having everything prepared and set and ready to go. That type of setup and management and preparedness also gives you more time to connect with the kids. And so finding a way to work that into your system, like when you have a guest artist, making it a requirement, like what's your plan for the classroom organization in terms of your materials? Like that's one less thing that needs to be set up during class where it's taking attention away from the students and that opportunity for them to be building that relationship with the students.
And I think it sends also a strong message when the teacher walks out of the room. It's like, well, this is not really important.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
There's an example I remember seeing Michael Rowe speak in Chicago. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Michael Rowe, but he does community engagement work. And I think he did with sort of Southern Theater in Portland, but he does all these great interventions in community with art. But he stepped into a classroom and was invited by the principal and talked, to the administration. They were on board, came into the classroom, and quickly realized that the teacher was not in on it. And what that created was a really weird dynamic. And not only was it a weird dynamic in terms of ownership of the project, but there was some racial dynamic issues as well, because white administration invited a white teacher to go into an all-black classroom, and he was there to talk about an intervention that was about helping you, bringing this art to you.
We are bestowing this.
Yes, yeah, and that was never his intention, but he realized quickly that having that teacher as an ally was more important than having the administration on board.
And to speak to that quickly too, that situation that I described, the APS school, it was similar. Like this had been in planning stages for 2 years. 2 years. Oh, we've finally got the budgeting. We're ready to go. We're going to do this. We're so excited. The principal knew everything, all the planning stages, everything. A week before, we get a list of students. There are no females on the list. I respond back and I say, is there a reason that we did not include girls in this group? And that's when he explained that, I decided that this group of kids could really benefit from having a positive experience. Not to mention, you have no support. You are technically not equipped to have 15 EBD kids in a classroom, nor were you schooled on it. So, going back to that flexibility, it's like, how do we shift and adjust so that we can better manage the situation that we are dealing with, and the students are still able to have a really significant experience, and it's unfortunate, but it happens all the time, and that's why I really wanted to kind of talk about those things that, people kind of skirt around sometimes, is, you can be really, really successful, and it can be really intimidating at times, but if you go into the classroom well-equipped, well-aware, confident, and open, then you can have a great, successful class, On that note, I don't want us to run out of time, so what I would like to do is kind of do a little combo of a lesson that we created together in partnership with BSA. It's actually, the result is what you see on the walls here today. I want to walk you through kind of my process of how we worked through it, how the kids got involved, what came about, and get your feedback as well. At any time, if Elizabeth, you want to chime in, you guys have any questions, we can just have an open discussion about it. So the Capture Project. Today, what the Capture Project is it is a photo documentary project in which youth in the neighborhood connects with their broader community by creating portraits and documenting interviews of their community members. I want to talk a little bit about where it started and where it is now, because I think that's very important as well. When we first started the project, it was what I explained before in terms of it was going to be this long project where there was film involved. The concept at that point was to give students a tool, photography and multimedia, to empower their voices to make changes in their community through storytelling. So our idea was to go into schools, connect with the students, ask them what they were passionate about changing in their neighborhoods, then give them the tools to tell these stories in hopes that these tools would help them to spread the stories out through social media, helping them to create change with administration, community involvement, government officials, but it changed. And I'm really excited that it did change, because this is what we have now. So when we did the pilot, let me just go through. The storytelling concept was always in the concept. It has always been there from the beginning. Storytelling is still really a very important part of it. I'm tongue-tied. And when we first started with our pilot, we had a small group of kids. We went out into the streets with very little equipment to kind of test the scenario. They were photographing littering and, we want to see the neighborhood clean, so let's document that. One day, on our little walk, we came across Mr. Collier. We were photographing trash, but we walked by Mr. Collier's barber shop, and being a portrait photographer myself with, the artist who I was with, I'm like, buddy, why don't you do a little interview and photograph Mr. Collier? He was so intimidated. He became so nervous that right then and there, light bulb went off in my head, and I'm like, okay, that's an opportunity for learning, because he is not feeling comfortable engaging in social interaction. So it might be his age, it might be the time, the way society is right now with technology being such a big part of our lives, but how amazing would it be if next year we came back and he was a rock star at going in, interviewing the guy, photographing him, having a conversation as a young adult, and being able to display it. And so that's why we're here. I started off with my handy dandy lesson plan. So, our outcomes were storytelling, understanding the concepts of storytelling. We'll create strong interview questions. Through both examining how others tell stories and looking at their own work, students will begin to develop visual literacy. Will conduct interviews to tell their subject stories, and a number of various concepts. We only have 30 minutes, so I'm talking kind of fast.
Then talk a little bit about the population of kids that you were working with on this project.
Okay. Okay. So the children that we're working with right now most of them are residents of the Boulevard Corridor. So as many of you know, that area is one of our most impoverished areas in actually the southeast. That's the population we're working with. In correlation to that population, you will always, I don't know what the percentage is, Elizabeth, maybe you can help me with that, but there is a high percentage of learning disabilities and emotional disabilities in that population. So we always assume that we will need to make modifications and accommodations for those types of learners, because generally that is the population that we serve. So going from this, so you can, I'm just going to scroll through it, not really go into it, just so you can see the structure of my planning ahead of time. Now this is a pretty broad lesson actually it has a lot more detail than what we actually did in the workshop. And that's something else that I want to talk about, is talking about modifying units or condensing lessons. I always try to start full scope so that all the possibility is there. And if I need to pare it down, then I will do so as needed. When we were at the elementary school, we did do a version of this. This unit included more literacy and more written storytelling, and it was an entire quarter long. When we came into this community, after our experience last year with the pilot, last year we realized that with this population, there is a lot of, what's the word? It's a transient population. So it's very transient, and if last year over the summer when we met every week, we had students falling in and out. We had one group of 6 students that we wanted to work with all summer. This year we realized that we would have much more impact if we turned it into a one-day workshop instead of an all summer long workshop for 6 kids, and we offered the experience to 30 students. And so this particular unit was pared down to a one-day workshop experience. And they did a lot of work in that one day, but just it goes to show, that depending on the needs of your programming, you can still have really amazing results. You just might not go in as deep with the material you're covering. For instance, we didn't talk about aperture and shutter speed, and none of that technical stuff was discussed. We simply didn't have time, but the focus was on storytelling. Okay, so we have cameras, we have the ability to talk to people. Let's tell a story. And that was our pared down version. These are just some examples that I would have given the students if I had more time. Okay, so I want us to capture community. What does that mean to you?
I guess kind of telling the local story of what's happening in this area or the area that you live in.
Right, telling a story about the area that we live in. I walk when I teach. I'm probably bothering you hardcore. I'll try to stay in one place. What are different ways of storytelling? Jessica, what's an example of storytelling?
I think it starts with, I think of storytelling, I kind of think of the dynamics of storytelling. Maybe capturing conflict or capturing
Okay, good. Elizabeth, is there another medium in which, what are different mediums in which we can tell stories?
I come from a theater background. For photography, you can tell stories in music.
Right.
You can tell stories in spoken word poetry and all of those forms.
Right. There's so many different ways to tell a story. Puppets, music, movement, so many different ways. And taking that back to community, why would we want to tell the story of our community? How could that help us?
Creates a bond between people when they can relate to each other's stories and know where each other comes from.
Absolutely. So telling the story of someone in your community could create a bond. I'm a photographer, and when I am sent out on location, I often create bonds with my subjects. And it's really important for me to spend a few minutes talking to them, getting to know them, before I try to capture their story visually. And there's so many different ways to capture images. What's different between these two photographs? Can someone point out one difference between the photographs? The setting, absolutely. And close up, right? So the environment and the composition. So which one of these photographs tells us a little bit more about the person? The one on the left. Right, so absolutely. Jessica, what can you infer from this photograph just by looking at it? What's a story that comes to your mind in terms of who do you think this woman is?
Well, she's very proud of these awards, obviously, standing in trophies and all this sort of credential. So she's highly educated and successful. I mean, that's what, from looking at the other pieces in there, that's what I think.
Absolutely. So from this image, we can tell that this woman is proud. By her posture, we can see that maybe she's educated, maybe these are her awards, maybe they're the awards of her children. This is actually Antoinette Tuff. I photographed her for Atlanta Magazine, and I was sent on location to take an environmental portrait. Who can tell me which one of these is environmental?
It's the one with the, I would assume, with the trophies and awards and diplomas.
Right, absolutely. This is an environmental portrait. And why is this environmental as opposed to that? What do I mean by environmental portrait?
Setting subject in their surroundings.
Absolutely. So setting a subject in their surroundings. Capturing community, like we discussed, is a project where we are going to photograph community members, and I would like for you to help tell their stories by creating an environmental portrait. So when we photograph our community members, we want for them to be inside their space. Now, why would you think that that would be important to myself in helping you to tell your story? Well, it provides context, absolutely. One of the benefits of this project too is when you provide someone's context and you're able to share it, you're also helping to share that bond visually with your audience. So that's kind of how I would approach talking to the students about what we're about to do.
Then how did they react to that approach? I mean, because we're working with kids that they're still getting used to the cameras and things like that. So when you do that kind of lesson, what's the reaction with the population that we're working with, and what are
Okay. Actually, all the kids that we've worked with for this project respond really well to, sometimes it takes them longer to think about what I'm asking them, but we just spend more time discussing it, and they have responded really well.
Excuse me, what are the ages of the children involved in this?
In this project, they were all teenagers. Okay. So ages 11, well, the youngest was 11 to 15. So I'm trying to think of modifications for the intro.
Or if you've got another example further into your presentation.
Yes.
You can say, this was my initial approach, this is how
Absolutely.
I for this population.
Definitely. So that was this. I gotcha. All right, so the next step in all this was, I'm just going to explain this part. Basically, not only are they photographing, but they're interviewing. So it's kind of a big deal because they're going to be walking up to people they don't know. As part of the process, just the structure of the program, the kids were broken up into groups. Inside of their groups, like I said before, we're very grateful to have mentors. So for each 4 kids, we had 1 to 2 mentors, which is huge. We broke into groups. We talked about interviewing. We talked about how you present yourself. And all of that still was student-centered. And I will, once we talk about the dynamics of that group, we can talk about modifications. But I just want to kind of show you what I mean in terms of student-centered, project-based learning. All right. So basically, we explained the concepts, then they did some role playing, and then they went out into the community. But
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm so intrigued about this. When you said the word interview, what did they think that meant? Did they think job interview? Did they think TV interview? Did they have a frame of reference for it?
We talked about, they assumed, I think based on our conversation and actually telling them that they were telling the person's story, that's kind of what we meant. But we did some exercises for them to come up with their interviews. And so this is the difference between teacher-centered and student-centered. Okay, we can talk to them about how to do it, right? But we don't tell them, or we can talk to them about the scope of what we want them to accomplish, but we don't tell them how to do it. So, okay, groups, we know that when you go out, are you just going to walk up to a stranger? What is the first thing you're going to do when you walk up to someone? Introduce yourself, absolutely. How are you going to do that? What's important when we introduce ourselves? So we would go into that same thing, questions, answers. Okay, good. Yes, it's important for you to know what you're talking about. It's important for you to be polite, all these things. And then they come up with their introduction in their groups, individually. Then canvassing questions. So what is our criteria for taking these photographs? We want to capture the old Fourth Ward community. So what does that mean? Talk about that. Are we going to photograph people outside of the community? No. Well, then it's important to canvass the community because they were just doing cold calls, going out. Anyways, so as you see, this is how we set it up to where the students were providing the information. To speak to Elizabeth's question about accommodations, when the students were broken up into groups, they came up with their questions, But they also had the opportunity to do a role play and practice in front of us. And when the mentors were working one-on-one with the students, at that point they were able to kind of identify the students that might need more help. Those that are a little bit more shy, those that might be more internal, those who want to take a behind the scenes role. And so in those situations, Elizabeth, that's when, in setting up that group dynamic, we're able to identify the roles that fit best with the students. Now, we wanted each student to have the same experience, so each one was actually required to take a photograph and required to do an interview. Now, I believe in some of the groups where a few of the students did not feel as comfortable, they worked as a team, because even in the dynamic, it was a team scenario. So there was a photographer and then an interview person holding the recording device so that the photographer wouldn't feel overwhelmed in the technical, and they had the support of their teammate. And so in a couple of those situations, you'll see when you walk around that there's two interviewers. If a student was feeling uncomfortable, they worked as a team, so they might bounce back and forth asking questions, which also is great because it allowed the students to kind of take the pressure off themselves and realizing like the importance of that group dynamic and how this person's your teammate, and if they don't press the record button, then there goes the interview, and then you're going to play that role. So it was a really great way for them to share the responsibility of the project and support each other. So does that answer your question? Jessica, do you have one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously all this is like really well thought out. Cool. But I guess my question is, I know you have to make a lot of modifications and changes on the fly right, to deal with the current situation. Do you have a curriculum where you have kind of the standard lesson plan and then have a modified lesson plan ahead of time?
No, I don't.
And it's not the way we work.
Okay.
We as parents are very focused on what you need to know, what you need to get, what you need to situation. So we're always standards led, we're always curriculum led.
Can't take one of
But
us.
none of it, other than approach, is set.
Yeah.
So what you'll see here, sorry, take away from you, just a small moment. What you see here, for those of you who were here yesterday, Mark might have talked about putting steps of the project sometimes where the students can see it. Neda's done the same thing but with the population, teaching them how to checklist with the steps. The body system that she's speaking of, Mark might have talked about the very same thing in terms of watching the dynamics in your classroom and finding the student who could be an art buddy to another student. So the techniques are very similar, but how we offer them to the communities that we're working with are always driven by the needs of that community.
I mean, the reason I ask is just because, I remember, and I think anybody with a teaching degree takes a class like The Exceptional Child or something like that. I mean, that was the name of the class.
Yes.
Right? So
Me too.
it was, and then I think what was helpful was practicing those modifications. So if I had a lesson that I could think about, if I had someone with, that had, a disability around reading or there was something with sensory, how to modify that. Because for me, it was a moment of training so I could have
Absolutely.
training if it came up, and not necessarily you want to pre-plan everything or
Right.
plan expectations. But if you do have kind of a warehouse or storehouse of quick ideas, that was helpful for me, but I also learned a lot by writing.
Right.
That's the method that we teach, and so what we're inviting people to do is don't prepare that second curriculum or that second approach, but exercise your approach. Say you have a student with a mobility impairment. Let's actually work that through. But what I'm sharing with my teaching artists is now that you've done that, what parts of that could you take into a situation on the fly if your student presents with a visual impairment or presents with a hearing impairment? Because the methodology is what you're going to take with you, not necessarily the approach. Right. And so that's what we're talking about in terms of as she worked her way through the Creators Project and has changed over the last 3 years as we've gotten to know this community better. The methodology stayed the same. The actual how we did each thing changed.
And Jessica, too, we work very closely with VSA, Arts of Georgia, so that our artists that come in get just an intro of, lesson planning, and these are the populations we work with. And then when we are in the setting, in the environment, there's always conversation right after. Okay, so powwow, what happened today? What changes do we need to make? Did you guys notice that Billy wasn't able to write? Pay attention to that next time, so that when we're working with him, we can be there to help guide him in the way that he needs. So no, we don't plan ahead, but it is on our radar. Well, thanks everyone. Please make sure that Jessica has your email addresses. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank Elizabeth and Jessica for including me in this programming. I actually do want to thank Ponce City Market for giving us this space, and also, do you want to say anything else, Elizabeth, about our funding? Okay, so thanks everybody, and Jessica, if she has your emails, I will send all of this to you in PDF format, so you can click to all the links and all that good stuff, and we'll be set. Thanks so much. Thanks, absolutely.